Hello YouTube, today we're going to be doing another Core i7-6700k system build. We started out by unboxing the Corsair Carbide Air 540 case. I've used this case in 2 separate builds this week alone, and I am very impressed. This case has a lot of space for airflow, components, and really makes a great case if you're going to be going with an all-in-one water cooler. The finish is really nice, and the quality seems to be rather consistent over the 3 cases that I have opened so far. I would recommend this case very highly to any system builder or custom enthusiast that would like to have a very nice case to display on their desk. One thing to note is that the display window is extra large. It has a very low profile metal surround so that you can really take in all of those wonderful components. We chose the Z170-A motherboard this time around. I had the Z170-A Deluxe in my last build. However, the Z170-A board is a slightly more economical option, and it still comes with a lot of the features that you would be looking for in a Z170 board. The first thing you want to do when installing it is install the back plate for the motherboard. The back plate snaps in rather easily. Then you can put the motherboard into the case. This case has a little standoff with an extra nub on it so that the motherboard will sit in place once it's found its sweet spot. The motherboard itself can be a little bit tricky to get into the back plate, so you want to take your time and make sure that the back plate metal isn't sticking into the motherboard. I did have one build where the USB surround kind of got stuck, so you want to make sure that that's not the case. Once the motherboard is firmly seated into the case, you can install the processor. We'll be installing the i7-6700k unlocked processor from Intel. When you're unboxing the processor, just be careful not to touch any of the back pins on the processor, as that could cause problems with the connections. As well, the oil on your fingers are really bad for connections made of copper and other metals. That can actually cause corrosion. Next, you'll want to pop open the socket cover. Do that by pushing down on the bar and moving it slightly to the left and then pulling back. Once the socket's open, be sure not to touch any of the pins inside the socket. If you bend one of those pins, your motherboard's broken, and they will not cover that by warranty. Also, make sure you're holding the processor by its sides. Do not touch the bottom of the top. And you want to line up the arrow on the processor with the little side of the socket that's got kind of an edge cut off the side. If you push down the cover, you'll also see that there's an arrow on that as well. When you push down the bar, the plastic cover will automatically pop off. Now, our processor had a little bit of heatsink compound on it from factory, so we decided to use some rubbing alcohol to clean it. You can use rubbing alcohol in a small cotton cloth or something of that nature. Just make sure that it's not wet or dripping. You want it to be just slightly moist. We'll be using the Corsair Vengence LPX 2666 MHz RAM. This is DDR4 memory. The memory works very well with this motherboard, and it is also on the compatibility list. Now you might be asking,
"Hey Prox, I only have 2 sticks. Which sticks do I put in?"
Well, you want to reference your manual. Your manual will show you exactly the correct RAM configuration that you should be using. In the old days, you could put a stick of RAM in any slot and your motherboard would post. Now that's not the case. You may notice I'm using a static strap. I do recommend a static strap for all system builders, just to ensure that you don't damage your static sensitive components. Put the memory into the slots, and then you're done. We selected the H110i GTX cooler. This is the second build that I've used this cooler in. Very satisfied with this cooler thus far. It really gives you a lot of low temperatures on your CPU, temperatures like 23 degrees, 24 degrees at idle, when your ambient room temperature is 20 degrees. So it's a really good cooler, and I'd recommend it to anyone doing an all-in-one water cooler system. Now you'll have to do some assembly on this. You want to screw on the fans. Now, we ran into a few issues where some of the screws can be a little hard to get along with. Just make sure that you're careful. It is an aluminum radiator and you don't want to over torque the screws. Installing the radiator is a cinch. The top of the case comes off with 2 thumb screws, and then you can just slot it in carefully. Make sure that you don't drop it in the case. You don't want to damage your motherboard. There's just a few screws, and there are washers that come with the screws for installing it at the top of the case. You don't really have to use them. Once the water cooler is screwed in place, you'll need to install the back plate. The back plate is very easy to use. For this particular chipset, you want to slot the little screw holes closest to the middle of the back plate. Now you'll want to install the standoffs. Notice here the standoffs actually have 2 long skinny ends on both sides. Those are the ones that you want to use for this particular build. Now you may have to apply some pressure to the back plate, just a little bit, to keep it from falling out while you're screwing in the standoffs. Then you'll need to line up the CPU cooler with the standoffs in order to put on the thumb screws. You don't want to over tighten the thumb screws. Make sure that you only hand tighten them. You don't want to use a screwdriver or you may damage your motherboard. Next, you'll probably want to clean up some of the cables. The water cooler has a lot of cables that it comes with. There's a USB header cable to control it using the Corsair Link software, which we'll look at in another video. There are a lot of connectors for your fan headers. Now the nice thing with this case is that you can just tuck them away into the other chamber and you can worry about plugging them in back there. That'll give you a nice clean look when you're finished. For this build, I tuck most of the cables into the other chamber just to give it that nice clean look that you would kind of expect out of having such a large display window on your case. You don't want a whole bunch of cables in there or in the way to make it look less than ideal. For the power supply, we selected the Corsair RM1000i. Again, 1000 watts is overkill for this system. But if you ever want to upgrade in the future or you're tempted to do SLI, it's nice to have the extra power without having to upgrade your power supply. Now the hot swap SATA cables for one of the drives at the bottom of the case was a little bit in the way. You have to kind of get a little bit creative to tuck it underneath your power supply to squeeze it in, although the power supply does go in rather easily. Just put it in at a bit of an angle against the little plate that guides it in, and it'll just drop right in. Couple of screws into your power supply, and you're good to go. You can see I'm just connecting the fan headers and all of the power cables, kind of cleaning them up as best I can. This chamber, you won't see it from the outside, so you can basically do whatever you want. If you want to tidy up the cables, you can. I didn't. There's nothing wrong with leaving the cables a little bit messy in this chamber. That's what this chamber should be used for, to conceal your laziness. So you want to feed all the cables through into the other chamber where the motherboard is in order to connect everything up. So it's a good idea to take a look at your motherboard, see where your connectors are, and choose where you want to feed it through to give it the best, cleanest look that you can achieve. The drive cage that it comes with is rather convenient. We're not using the Intel 750 PCIe SSD for this build. For this particular build, we had a couple of Intel 530 480 gig and 240 gig SSD drives available, so we decided to just reuse those, as the performance difference between the PCIe Intel 750 and a 530 480 gigabyte is not overly significant when you're talking about day-to-day use on your computer. We selected the Asus Strix Direct CU2 GTX 970. This is the second time I've used the 970 in a build, and in my build I used the 980 Ti. This is a very good all-around card for gaming or for processing for videos or anything that uses the NVIDIA CUDA processors for rendering or compiling or compressing video like Adobe products. The 970 GTX is more than sufficient for this particular build. The 970 does come with a nice solid backplate similar to the 980, which provides a little bit of additional reinforcement as well as heat dissipation for the board. The main differences other than performance between the 980 Ti and the 970 GTX, the 980 has 3 fans on it, whereas the 970 GTX only has 2. However, it does come with the same 0 decibel silent operation, where the fans will only come on if they're needed. Once your video card is in and your cables are all connected, you can seal it up and you're ready to start overclocking, gaming, and configuring. Well, there you have it, another very successful build. We were able to overclock the 6700K processor to 4.6 gigahertz. It was looking like it might hit 4.7, but it just needed too much voltage for me to be comfortable with it. It seems that these chips tend to hit the 4.5 to 4.6 range rather easily. Anything beyond that seems to require way more voltage than is really worth it for your overclocking gains. Unless you're really hardcore, and then by all means, go for it, kick it into high gear. Overall, awesome system and another satisfied customer. Although I don't actually get paid to do this, so another satisfied friend, I suppose. Alright, if you liked my video, please leave me a comment or a like or a subscribe, and if you'd like to see more videos, or if you have any questions or requests that you'd like to see, questions you'd like answered, please put them in the comments and I'd be happy to answer your questions. I have been in IT for 14 years, so I do have quite an extensive background. If you do have anything that you have a question on or that you're struggling with in your build, just let me know. I'm more than happy to help.